Hello. It is an absolutely gorgeous morning here on the farm today. I'm just out in my gardens, which is where you'll find me a lot of the time in the spring. Unfortunately, my house gets neglected this time of year, but I find that if I can get on top of all of the edging and get some early weeding done and some mulching done in the spring, it really saves me later on in the summer. There's a certain beauty to the gardens this time of year. There's something about the orderliness of everything coming in before the fullness of summer and the chaos of the fall garden. So I really enjoy being out in the gardens doing work this time of year. It's also not so hot and the bugs haven't come out yet. So it really is a pleasant time to be getting a lot of the work done if I can manage to prioritize it. But today I'm doing something a little different. Today I'm going to be making a special garden bouquet with early spring flowers. I've got some stored tulips and narcissus. I also have some lilacs that I managed to get ready in time in my hoop house. And I'm going to be including some other really special cuts, including some more rare flowers like leucojum, things that we don't see as often. So I wanted to get very specific today as I go through step by step and show you just exactly how I go about harvesting for a special bouquet order like this. I wanted to take you along to see how I harvest and handle each specific flower because some of them are treated a little bit differently to make them successful. And then we'll assemble what I'm sure is going to be a gorgeous spring bouquet. So first things first, I've got some clean snips and a clean bucket of water. Notice the word clean. It's really important to be using sterilized tools to prevent the existence of bacteria because bacteria is one of the things that is going to shorten the vase life by dirtying the water and getting taken up by the flowers. All right, I'm gonna grab some of these gorgeous hellebores. These are Fire and Ice series of hellebores. I find these really reliable. I have some fancier hellebores as well, but sometimes we struggle with stem length and sometimes we struggle more with diseases. These ones are really, really successful for me, and they do come in a couple variations of color from whites to reds and pinks. So I find these to be great. We're at a stage of ripeness now with hellebores where I don't have to worry too much about them. Earlier on in the season, there's a little bit of a different process for hellebores, so just keep that in mind. And I do plan to get a video up on how to harvest and handle hellebores in all the stages. This stage, my hellebores have a level of ripeness that makes them a lot easier to deal with. They're a little bit more robust, and I can tell that because I'm seeing some seed pods forming. So even though I've got some blooms that are more fresh, they're less ripe, there's a mixture of those on the stems. So I'm going to be cutting these down deep on an angle and putting these straight into my water bucket, and I'll be processing them a little bit more in my studio. Absolutely one of my favorite flowers. And they have such a long length of life if you leave them as plants. So I can make use of these for months. So they are really a great one to have in a perennial garden. Beside me, this is Bruna Jack Frost. This is a really wonderful perennial to have in your kitchen gardens. I appreciate this perennial because it can handle part shade conditions. It likes some morning sun, but some afternoon shade. So it's a great one to tuck in to your landscape underneath some shrubs. And it sort of just does its own thing rather quietly. And in the spring, it produces these gorgeous blue flowers that look a lot like a forget-me-not. The key that I find with Bruna is to cut the flowers when they're a little bit more developed. The stems are a little bit woodier, and yet there are still some buds visible in the stem. So I try to harvest them fairly open, but there still are some buds to allow an extended vase life. I expect a vase life of about 5 days, maybe 6 days with this one in a warm house. I'm going to be cutting quite deep on this one to get that length. All right, I'm up in a little bit of a messy part of my garden because I'm changing this garden. I'm actually getting rid of parts of this because of this particular plant, which I'm going to harvest today. This one is a native. It is thimbleberry, and it's a bit of a nightmare because it sends the longest runners underneath my lawn for meters and then pops up all over the place. And so it's become a real problem because it's slowly been invading into my garden closer and closer to my house. So I want to pull this one back and create more of a buffer. So on the plus side, I'm getting rid of this garden. This is going to be turned back into lawn. And so I can harvest these guys. I don't want them here anyways. And at this stage, I like to use these in bouquets when they're still fairly immature. They hold up quite well. So I'm going to give these a sharp angled cut, and I rather like the twiggy look of them too. So I'm going to get a few of these for this bouquet. From shade to some of the hottest and driest spots in my garden, we have a stucco wall of our house here that takes sun for almost the entire day. And of course, my crop choice has reflected that. And something that I grow here that does very well in these conditions is sage. Sage makes a beautiful foliage for bouquets. It has a nice structure. It has, of course, a little bit of a blue hue to it. And it also has a lovely scent. So I'm going to have just a few sprigs of sage in this bouquet. It's important to be using sage when it's a little bit more mature. When woody stems have had a chance to form, it'll hold up a lot better once it's cut. It's also important to be pruning sage to keep the growth habit nice. So you can see here I have a taller clump of sage. I actually left this one unpruned this spring because I wanted to allow it to flower. However, I did prune some of my sages already, which means they aren't going to flower for me this spring, but they'll start putting on that secondary growth a lot quicker. So I've kind of done both things here. And I'm going to be stealing a few stems of this one here for this bouquet. I don't know if you've already spotted in behind here, but I have to come back today and pick my asparagus. They also do really well in this section. They seem to enjoy the heat. They are going crazy right now. So I'm just going to take a couple sprigs of this gorgeous foliage. Oh, smells so good. And no spring bouquet would be complete without this geranium. This is a beautifully scented cranesbill geranium, and I specifically will harvest the bud bits on these. These will hold up well in a vase as opposed to just the individual leaves. They also, at this stage, I'm starting to get the length that I need for bouquets, especially for this bouquet, which is going to be a larger and taller bouquet. So I'm going to grab the taller ones of these. Also, just a fabulous fragrance. I don't even need cutters for this one. I can just reach down to the base with my fingers and pinch out for the longest possible stem length. In the springtime, tree and shrub foliages come in really handy for me, from native species to ornamental species. This is a paper birch behind me. I also like to use alder, beaked hazelnut, armillarius, and even apple tree foliage from my old apple tree. This time of year, a lot of this foliage doesn't have pest damage on it, which tends to come later in the season. So later on in the season, I don't use these things quite as much. I also find the early bits of leaves, for whatever reason, I test them out first, of course, and I do find that a lot of the early foliage, especially if I'm cutting it when leaves are just starting to emerge, it seems to hold up really well in a vase. Lilacs are actually early this year for me, and I noticed that this variegated lilac was starting to open up on my patio where I have a bunch of my potted up younger lilacs stored right now while we decide where we're going to be planting our lilac field. So anyways, I noticed that one of the lilacs had quite a few blooms, was starting to open up, and so I have stuck it in one of my hoop houses just to encourage those blossoms to open up faster. And it's actually been quite successful. It's been in here for a couple of days, and just the extra warmth in the hoop house has really encouraged these blooms to open up. When you're cutting lilacs, you want to wait until you're seeing each cluster about half open to 3/4 open. Lilacs don't really open up that much in the vase once they're cut, so it's important to wait until at least some of the blossoms are open. But I want to get them while the tip part is still in bud. I don't want to be cutting lilacs ideally when they're fully open. If I do that, I'm going to lose some of my vase life. So this is a really great stage right now for me to be cutting these lilacs wonderfully just in time for this bouquet. So this dainty little darling here is leucojum. This one seems to be a pretty easy naturalizing bulb to be growing. I have it in full sun, but it can also tolerate part shade. But what I do know that it likes is rich and well-drained soil. And what I actually have it planted in here is we have a very clay heavy soil. So this clump of bulbs is sitting with wet feet through a lot of the winter, and yet it still seems to be doing well. This is my second spring with this one. When you're harvesting this flower, you want to see that at least a couple of the flowers on the stem are open, and then it should have a vase life of about 8 to 10 days. Similar to daffodils, the stems leak a bit of a slimy, clear fluid, so it is best to condition these on their own in their own water. So I'm just harvesting these ones last, and then I'm going to take all of my flowers into my studio, and this one's going to go straight into its own vase of water. When we say that flowers need time to condition, what we're really saying is that flowers need time to recover from being cut. So they need time from when they're being cut between then and when they're being worked with out of water, for example, made into a bouquet. So between those two things, we need to condition the flowers. It's really just a fancy way of saying stick them in some water and let them sit for at least a few hours. Somewhere cool is better, and growers will be doing that by taking their harvest straight into cold storage as fast as possible. So some of these flowers are already conditioning. They're already cut into water, and I don't need to do anything else. But as I mentioned, some of them need a little bit of special treatment. One such flower is the hellebore, the wonderful hellebore. They can be finicky when you cut them. Now, as I mentioned, these guys are a little more mature. They're in a bit more of a mature stage, so they're not going to be as finicky for me. However, I still would like to treat them a little bit differently. So there's two things I like to do with hellebores at this stage. First, I want to use a product called Quick Dip. Maybe you've heard of it. It increases the hydration ability of the stem of the flower. So I recommend pouring a small amount into a little jar. This is maybe a 1/2 inch to 1 inch of solution in here. I can use this a couple times, then I can discard it. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm gonna score the stem of my hellebore. I'm gonna put at least 2 scores in along the stem. Then I'm going to give each stem a fresh angled cut, dip in the Quick Dip, and then they're going to go in their own bucket of deep water up to about halfway up the stem. I'll also be doing a quick cut and a dip with the Bruna flowers. Lilacs are another one that benefit from a treatment with Quick Dip. It's a woody stem as well, and in order to encourage enough uptake, we are also going to create a split in each of the stems of about 1 to 2 inches long, and then we're going to bend 1/2 of that stem a little bit just to help open that up and make sure that these lilacs stay hydrated enough, and then plunge them in a deep bucket of cool water. And then I also need to rehydrate the flowers that are coming out of dry storage. If you're not sure how to dry store daffodils, you can check out my video on that topic. It's very thorough. It should leave you quite well equipped with how to harvest and store and work with daffodils in mixed arrangements with other flowers. So I've got some gorgeous daffs coming out of storage. These ones I actually just cut a couple days ago, so they're just sitting in water in my cold storage. And I have some that I have been in storage for about a week, and I'm going to trim them now just a little bit off the ends and get them into some water so that they can rehydrate. And in a similar fashion, I need to rehydrate my tulips. Tulips are actually stored with the bulbs on, so they're pulled out right out of the ground with their bulbs on. So for the tulips that I'm using for this bouquet, I'm going to be taking that bulb right off of that stem. I can either break it off or I can cut it off. The bulbs are typically just disposed of. And then this tulip can be placed in water so that it can hydrate. This one's already quite well hydrated because it's been stored in a humid environment. Now, if your tulip stems have become a little bit dehydrated and floppy while they've been in storage, that's okay. Just make sure you wrap them as you're putting them into water. Otherwise, they might not rehydrate straight. They might keel over and they might rehydrate with a bent stem. So just wrap them up nice and tight in a piece of newspaper or a piece of scrap paper, and then stick them in water, and they should be able to rehydrate with a straight stem. So my cuts are all prepped, and now they're going to condition, aka they're going to rest and drink some water. And I'm going to let this happen for at least a few hours, and I'm going to be moving them into my flower cooler so that they can condition at the optimal temperature. So you can see there's a bit of a process here, and there's a bit of a wait time when you are designing out of the garden. So typically you'll find me doing what I did today, which is I'm out there first thing in the morning when things are still fresh and cool and the flowers are in the best possible shape for me to be cutting them. I get them cut, I get them conditioning during the day, and then they're ready for me to work with that afternoon or evening. But on a similar note, I could also go out in the evening when it has cooled down, and I could cut then and let them sit overnight, and then they'll be ready for me to work with first thing in the morning. So there's a little bit of flexibility there, but also the need to plan ahead a little bit. I'm going to get these guys into the cooler now, and the next time that you see me, I will be making these flowers into a gorgeous spring bouquet. All right, we're back and everything's had a good drink. It looks amazing. I'm gonna set up my table now, lay out all of my ingredients, and make sure all my stems are clean. It's really important when making a bouquet to make sure all stems are clean, and it's a lot easier to do that before I start assembling the bouquet itself. So I'm gonna clean stems, and what that means is I'm gonna make sure that the bottom portion of the stem where my binding point will be and where my stems will be sitting in water are clean of foliage and branchy bits. Want a nice and clean stem. It'll make bouquet assembly easier, but it will also benefit the bouquet itself. It will help with the vase life by keeping the water clean of any rotting, dirtying bits that would otherwise be sitting in the water. Tulips like to grow when they are in water. They'll continue to grow and lengthen. One trick to help reduce this is to put a little slit or a prick at the top of the stem, just under the bloom. Okay, starting with some of my focals, I'm going to be doing a spiral bouquet technique. I'm starting my spiral by making the shape of an X with two of my stems. And I'm holding that in between my thumb and my finger, then rotating 180 degrees as I continue to add stems at about a 45-degree angle. And this allows me to quickly build out the base of my bouquet. I'm right-handed, so that means I'm holding my bouquet in my left hand, and I'm placing the stems in with the heads facing to the left and the bottom of the stems facing to the right. If you're left-handed, you would be doing this in reverse. So you would be holding your bouquet in your right hand
and placing your stems with the heads to the right and the bottom of the stem angled to the left.
Tulips will lengthen as they sit in this bouquet, so they can be tucked down a little deeper. And I'm just grouping my flowers as I add them, staggering my heights for that floaty effect, that real soft, gardeny feel. And I'm just not gonna fuss too much right now. I can always come back in and raise and lower things. It's a shorty. Save my shorter flowers for the end.
As I continue adding stems, I'm rotating my bouquet continuously by flipping it over, usually at 180 degrees.
So I can raise and lower stems here as I near the end, make sure things are visible.
In a spiral bouquet, all the stems are facing in the same direction. This is gentler on the stems than the crisscross method, so it helps to avoid breakage and damage. It also makes it much more possible to adjust the height of the stems, move flowers around, or add them in with specific placements.
You know, I don't think I could ever get tired of a bouquet design that comes straight out of a garden. There's something so special and unique about it because the weather patterns and the temperatures that made all of these flowers ready at this particular time will never be quite the same. And this bouquet is completely unique and will never exist again just as it is. So there's just something so special and captivating about floral design from the garden like this, and both the challenge and the gift that it is to be working with limited ingredients that are limited by whatever I could produce and by what the season has in store. If you have any questions about any of the ingredients in this bouquet, please feel free to drop me a comment. You're very welcome to do so. I really enjoy hearing from you. I hope you have a wonderful garden season ahead of you as well this year. I'm gonna get this puppy wrapped up now and ready for pickup. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.